Okay, we're live now.
This is the meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. Dr. Evans, could you please announce roll call?
Sure.
Call the roll.
Dr. Blanton,
Present.
Dr. Bullock,
Present.
Ms. Wisner,
Present.
Dr. Fleming,
Present.
Ms. Patton,
Present.
Dr. Penfield,
Present.
Dr. Weddington,
Sorry, y'all. Present. I
It's
couldn't
okay.
find my button. I couldn't find my button.
It's okay. Mr. Smith,
Present.
Ms. Jenkins,
Present.
and Dr. Winter.
Present.
Those are the 10 that are here. The rest are not present. So we have quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, online visitors, and online listeners to the February 13th, 2025 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation, licensure, continuing education, and professional standards of North Carolina educators. I am Ann Bullock, Chair of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.northcarolinapublicschools.org, on the quote SBE meetings unquote link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of the commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring this matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for the February 13th, 2025 meeting?
So moved. This is Kim Winter.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. Do I have a second?
Second. This is Chris Blanton.
Thank you, Dr. Blanton. Any discussion, additions, or corrections to the agenda? Hearing none, Dr. Evans, could you please call the roll for the vote on the approval of the agenda?
Yes. Dr. Blanton,
Approve.
Dr. Bullock,
Approve.
Ms. Wisner,
Approve.
Dr. Fleming,
Approve.
Ms. Patton,
Approve.
Dr. Penfield,
Approve.
Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
Mr. Smith,
Approve.
Ms. Jenkins,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
Thank you.
The agenda is approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on December 12th, 2024 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Penfield. May I have a second?
Second. Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. Any discussions, corrections, or edits to the minutes? Hearing none, Dr. Evans, could you please call the roll for approval of the minutes from December 12th, 2024?
Yes, I can. Dr. Blanton,
Approve.
Dr. Bullock,
Approved.
Ms. Wisner,
Approve.
Dr. Fleming,
Approve.
Ms. Patton,
Approve.
Dr. Penfield,
Approve.
Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
Mr. Smith,
Approve.
Ms. Jenkins,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
Unanimous approval.
Thank you. The minutes are approved. The link for the January and February 2025 State Board of Education meetings has been sent to you prior to this meeting. The recordings are bookmarked at the presentations for the Educator Standards and Practices Committee, which is the committee that handles the work of Pepsi. If anyone has questions, please let Dr. Evans know, and we will follow up during the March 2025 Pepsi meeting. I will also note that one of our agenda items, as you all are aware, is related to something that happened in the February 2025 meeting, and gives us an opportunity to revisit something that will be a positive impact, I believe. So we have a few NCDPI staff updates and discussion items, some for motion for approval. Ms. Suzanne Lujan and Mr. Robert Filter will present policy amendments to CTED 004, License 001, and License 003 for discussion and action. I turn it over to them.
Thank you. Appreciate your time today. Suzanne Lujan, who is the CTE Sandhills Regional Coordinator. Her primary responsibility, statewide responsibility from a regional services perspective is licensure. So she coordinates and helps put all this together, and I'm a section chief for regional services, and we appreciate your time. Next slide. So the revisions that we're bringing today will impact CTE D004, our CTE licensure policy, and some changes that also affect licensure policy, LICN 001 and LICN 003. All the revisions proposed today, if approved, will take effect on July 2025. That helps the field with consistency in hiring staff and to lessen confusions in the middle of the year that could create if we change this in the middle of the year. So we're proposing a July 1st, 2025 date. Next slide. So the process that we use as we go through this licensure updates. So generally, we try to do this every 2 years. We engage stakeholders from school districts and the program area consultants who are the experts in the CTE course content, and look at any proposed changes that may be needed for licensure policy. This is done to ensure that we're providing opportunities to hire qualified candidates to teach our CTE courses. Next slide. So our first request is to add a new CTE license in aviation. This will provide an opportunity for candidates with an aerospace or aviation background to obtain a license to teach the drone courses. Currently, if we have a substantial drone program across the state, and if someone has that aviation background, they currently do not have a license to fit that, so this would allow that opportunity. Next, we have requesting to add, we have several technical updates for the ag license. The first thing is it has been listed as agriculture, but we're updating it to agricultural, which is what it actually is, education license. And then adding related degrees and work experience. We're also proposing to add the associate's degree with 4 years of work experience as an option to obtain that license. And then one additional change is we're looking to, as an option for candidates to complete the Delta 40-hour induction course in place of the 3 credit-hour supervised agriculture experience. That still will be an option, but that content is also covered as part of the Delta 40-hour induction course, so they would get that same content there. The next update is to our information technology education license. These updates are intended to provide the field multiple options for licensing teachers to teach the computer science courses since this now is a graduation requirement. To better align with this, we are proposing the name change as well of Information Technology Education License to Computer Science and IT Education. We're adding a testing requirement of the computer science praxis or any of 4 industry recognized credentials in the IT field. The computer science and IT program area consultants have vetted and determined that these credentials align with the computer science curriculum in determining that candidates have the appropriate content knowledge to teach this course. And then on the next slide, we talk about the actual computer science praxis and the praxis scores. And we are suggesting a score of 149 as acceptable for this, since 25 out of 29 state or territories use the computer science praxis test and have used a qualifying score of 149. Our next change has to do with better alignment within the hospitality career cluster. We've added these related degrees, primarily pertaining to hospitality and work experience, to the family and consumer science license and marketing licenses areas to allow those as allowable for those licensor areas. Sorry. And then pertaining to the automotive services, we made some technical corrections, including adding the numbers to the ASE areas. You'll see those beside like ASE brakes is A5, et cetera, as we go through there. And then added as an option the ASE Master Automobile Technician, the A1, A8, since it covers all of the areas, to allow that as an option as qualification for that license. Our local course option license allows for districts to hire the most qualified candidates for specific courses that have been approved through the local course option process. For example, we have a local course pathway in boat building in the eastern part of the state that may require expertise outside of the normal CTE licensure area. And this is where we might use the LCO license. The DPI licensure staff has raised the concern that the word limited in that license may cause confusion with the limited license that is issued at the request of PSUs for continued employment. So we are simply requesting that the word limited be removed from that CTE local course option limited license.
Mr. Filter, for that one in particular, I know that there may be need a little more context about if it's boat building in the east and something else in the west, how does that work? We talked about that a little bit. If you want to just give it, like, for example, that's what they're getting, that it's on their license, that type of stuff. Just some context of how that license works, since it's a special.
Sure, no problem. So like the boat building, we'll still verify that they have a related degree, if appropriate, or related work experience. And so we're still looking at that, similar to all of the other areas. The other example we used in a previous meeting had to do with Christmas tree production, which a district had applied for and received the local course option for that in, I believe it was Ashe County. And so those candidates would have the appropriate work experience to be able to teach that course in that area.
Okay, thank
And
you.
then, thank you, appreciate it. With the CTE director license, we're adding clarifying language of M-level license in the CTE program area. That is something that licensure has always looked at, but wasn't specifically designated. So we're adding that there. We're also adding the requirement to pass the NCDPI sponsored new CTE Director Induction 2 final portfolio project. This will comply with the testing requirement for administrative licenses. And then in addition, at the request of the field, for those who already have a school administrator's license, we're adding completion of the NCDPI sponsored CTE Director Induction Level 2 as one of the course options. So they would now have 3 options to complete that last requirement. And then finally, we have a few technical edits. The first has to do with renumbering the sections to have consistency. Section 2 included the 2 digits below each of the categories within the content area, within that content. So we've updated all the sections 1, 3, and 4 so that they all have the 2 digits just from consistency in the document. And then thank you. And then we reformatted the table for the eligibility requirements for the initial CTE licensure. As you will see in that example, we moved from a columnar format to a row format, and it makes that content within those tables much easier to read. So that's all that we have there. I mean, that's the only change there, but it's substantial because there's a lot of those in the manual. And then in section 4, we moved items within the paragraph, the list of items within the paragraphs, the requirements to add licensure and licensure not allowed to add provisionally. We moved those from within the paragraph to bulleted lists to make them easier to read. And you can pretty much see that format. I say pretty much because I know it's small there, but you can see the format where it's listed individually out as opposed to within that in the paragraph. So it's easier to see, designate as part of that process. And those are the licensure updates that we are proposing.
Thank you, Mr. Filter. So I'll open the floor up for questions or clarifications that anyone would like related to these changes. I also want to say that it's obvious that the CTE group has done a lot of work around this and thought through what would be transparent and clear to the field. So I appreciate that work as well. So questions or clarifications from anyone needs? Mr. Filter, could you describe for the commission how these come up? Like when you were explaining to me how the process that it goes through to get to the stage. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Is Kim handling the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Kim, would you mind going back to 3 because I mentioned it, but there's a lot more detail there that help describe as we go through the process. So as I mentioned, we try to do this generally every 2 years. Sometimes it ends up being a little bit more than that. But we try to do it every 2 years. We gather information from the CTE program area consultants based on the courses that they're teaching. We gather information from CTE directors, from input that they've had regarding hiring teachers, etc. We create a list of proposed items. Then we take that back to the directors, generally at one of our conferences, and share those updates and get their opinions regarding that. And we also then follow that back up with the program area consultants. And then we take that to CTE leadership to share that with them to make sure that they are okay with that. Basically, that CTE leadership would be the regional coordinators and then the CTE assistant directors and director. We then take that, all of those updates to the CTE Advisory Council. That's comprised of about approximately 20 directors across the state. And then once that is approved, as it goes through that process, then we take it to the State Board of Education.
It's great.
Thank you.
Again, thank you. Any
You're
other
welcome.
questions or comments from anyone?
This is probably a stupid question, but when I see the IT, I'm old enough, I still think instructional technology as well. When you're changing the name to computer science and IT, is that like, should we write out in the information science or the information technology words for clarification, or do enough people know what the IT with computer science is supposed to mean?
So the computer science and IT and or information technology program area consultants felt that that better described what it was. So I'm not going to say that we hadn't considered information technology, but they felt that that was better representative as IT. So I appreciate the input, but that was their rationale from the computer science area. So
Okay, thank you.
Is there a glossary for this?
there is not. We can certainly look at and recommend that as in future iterations to possibly, as there is terminology, and we know there's acronyms in education, a lot of acronyms in education, and that might be something to consider as we move forward.
And I think the glossary is called Google.
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha, Dr. Fleming.
Well,
So
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. I'm sorry, Dr. Fleming.
he said it's
I
called
was just
Google.
messing,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, got it. Appreciate that. Yes.
Okay.
I will say
Shannon-
though, Madam Chairman, if I may say, I appreciate the hard work. CTE is in my blood, and I appreciate the work that Robert and Suzanne have done with this. Great folks. I know this is something that's ever evolving as industry changes and degrees change, and so I appreciate the hard work on this. Great job.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dr.
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fleming. Yes, with your ag background. Okay, so I'll just ask one more time. Is there any more questions or clarification? Very good. So do I have a motion to approve the policy amendments to CTED 004, license 001, and license 003 to be sent to the State Board of Education in March?
So moved. This is Randy.
Thank you, Dr. Benfield. Second,
This is Craig. I second.
thank you, Craig. All right, any further discussion? All right, Ms. Edwards, welcome. Are you prepared to call the roll for a vote on this?
Yes, I am.
All right.
All right. Dr. Blanton,
I think he had to leave.
Chair Bullock,
Approve.
Ms. Edwards, approve. Dr. Elliott, Dr. Fleming,
Approve.
Dr. Graham, Vice Chair Griffin, Ms. Hoskins, Ms. Jenkins,
Approved.
Dr. Locklear, Ms. Patton,
Approve.
Dr. Penfield,
Approve.
Mr. Smith,
Approve.
Ms. Smith, Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
Ms. Weisner,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
Motion passes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lujan and Mr. Filter for that presentation. Mr. Filter in particular, since you did that for us today, and I really appreciate it. And we again thank you for this.
All right, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Next, Dr. Tomerlin will present and revisit previously discussed policy amendments to license 001 for discussion and action. Dr. Tomerlin.
Thank you, Chair Bullock. Good afternoon, Pepsi members. Appreciate this opportunity to present some changes to policy LICN 001. Most of these you have seen, so I will try to go through this fairly quickly. The first thing that you will notice is some changes to license names, and that is reflective of what you just heard from CTE, where we are taking their revised names and incorporating them into LICN 001. So that's the first section that you see. Next, we move on to an issue related to out-of-state educators who come to us with 3 or more years of experience. So an out-of-state educator may be granted a CPL or continued professional license in the state of North Carolina if the license that they hold from another state is clear, unencumbered, and renewable. Many states call these things different names, so we just wanted to make sure that in order for us to grant you a CPL, you can't have any deficiencies, there's no additional requirements on the license, and that it is a renewable license. And they have 3 or more years of teaching experience. They have met licensure requirements in another state that are substantially similar to North Carolina State Board of Education requirements, and I'll talk about that in just a second, or holds the national board certification. The issuance of this license is contingent on statute, of course, but those are the 3 main requirements for someone to be issued a CPL. If you look below, there's a note here that says substantially similar license requirements are defined as follows. The educator completed an EPP that is approved in the state in which the EPP resides. So if you completed a program at University of Virginia, we have to know that the state of Virginia approves the University of Virginia's program as an EPP in Virginia. And then the comparable testing requirement, the educator has achieved a passing score on an examination that is approved by the state from which the educator license was issued and fulfills in parts the requirements to convert the license to a renewable license in that state. This is important because many people take many tests. So there are some we think of the Praxis Core. We get lots of folks submitting those types of assessments to us. And so we have to be clear that it is the test that allows the conversion of your initial license to a continuing license that we will accept, and not something like a Praxis 1 as opposed to a Praxis 2. Now, the note here is very important. Previously, we indicated that anybody who holds an elementary or ECG license would have to pass a comparable state approved licensure exam with a mathematics and a reading subtest. Or if they didn't have that, then they would have to take our foundations of reading and mathematics tests, or do a course that we offer to the educators. But since that requirement in law only applies to those who hold an IPL or an RL, If the candidate comes in qualifying for a CPL, then they would not be subject to that requirement. And so we have stricken that from this policy. And we hope this will be welcome news in the LEAs so that your experienced teachers, especially those who have like more than 15 years of experience, the likelihood that they took a test with a subtest of math and reading is very low, and they were getting caught up in this having to take another test. And so this waives that requirement. This would be effective when the board approves it, so that we can get folks who would otherwise qualify for CPL at the time of their application in North Carolina. We can go ahead and convert those licenses to a CPL and remove those testing requirements for those who qualify. And we're trying to get this done before the end of this fiscal year. So in case some of them are coming up against licensure expiration and things like that. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions about what we're proposing on this. All right. The next section is actually something that Pepsi itself presented to the State Board of Education, and this is just our inclusion of that into the policy, LICN 001. And so this has to do with teachers in their first year of residency. There are requirements that these folks have to meet. One of those is they have to have 10 hours of field experience. That's before they enter the classroom. We recognized, with the help of our K-12 partners, we recognize that that's really difficult for districts and charter schools. And so what we've done is said that at least 3 hours of field experience prior to entering the classroom. And then over the course of that first year, they can complete the remaining 7 hours of field experience for that. It can also be that requirement can be fulfilled while an educator holds a permit to teach or an emergency license. And then these were additional requirements for the onboarding process for educators. And those were, numbers 14 through 17 there were additional training requirements that were in legislation. And so we've incorporated them into those kind of pre-service requirements, those 10 days of professional learning before the start of the school year. We do stipulate that those 8 hours of required instruction in those 4 areas, those 4 new areas, they can be incorporated into the district's 10 days of professional development prior to the start of the school year for new teachers. And those are the changes that we have, and NCDPI respectfully requests your approval of these recommended changes.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Tomerlin. Do we have any questions? You should recognize quite a bit of this. I don't hear any questions. Thank you. So do I have a motion to approve the policy amendments to license 001 to be sent to the State Board of Education in March?
So moved, Aaron Fleming.
Thank you, Dr. Fleming. Second?
Second, Kim Winter.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. Any further discussion or questions related to this? Ms. Edwards, could you please call the roll for the vote?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Bullock,
Approve.
Ms. Edwards, approve. Dr. Fleming,
Approved.
Ms. Jenkins,
Approve.
Ms. Patton,
Approve.
Dr. Penfield, Mr. Smith.
He had to step away for a minute, he said.
Oh. Okay,
This is Craig Smith. Approve.
thank you. Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
Ms. Weisner,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
All right, so that we have all approved on that motion. All right, very good. So motion approved. All right, so as you know, last month or this month at the State Board of Education meeting, they returned the EPP accountability rules model rules to us, which is a positive opportunity for us to consider the alternative model that was created several years ago by Pepsi. And they've asked us the state board has asked us to revisit that model and bring it forward. So today, Dr. Seiberg will introduce the weighted accountability model for EPPs and give some context there. And then we'll talk about what will happen next, or we can decide what will happen next. So it won't be a vote, but it'll just be a part of our meeting. So I will turn it over to Dr. Seiberg.
Good afternoon, commission members. So what I presented to the board a couple days ago was some additional historical context, as well as a quick run through of the alternative accountability model, and that's what I'm prepared to share with you today. You have some materials in your artifacts that you can grab and review, and I'm happy to take any questions along the way. So Kim, if you can drive to slide 2. This is a sort of a brief outline of the accountability rule journey to date. And for some of you, you've been around since the inception of this commission. So this will hopefully jog your memory. And for others who are new to the group, this will be new learning for you. But I'm just going to go through this really quickly for you. This whole thing started back in July of 2017. A law was passed that established, at the time, a 4-measure model of EPP accountability. And in that law, it directed the board to adopt rules that establish standards of performance to govern continuing accountability of EPPs. So we move next to July of 2019. A new law was passed, and that reduced the 4-measure model to 3 measures. And it requested that the State Board of Education collaborate with Pepsi and the Department of Public Instruction to develop an alternative model for consideration. And there was a flurry of activity that happened with Pepsi and various subcommittees. The first thing that happened was a move in September of 2019. The State Board of Education passed now established TCED 008 and 013, and that established the standards of performance on the 3 measures that are in this law. And that was to be in line with the expectation of the law, and that was the first step towards moving this towards rulemaking. Then the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission broke into some subcommittees and started to work on an alternative model. And that needed to come to fruition relatively quickly as well. So we see in January of 2020, that alternative model shows up at the board for consideration. And that was again in line with the expectations that the law in July of 2019 was requiring. And after the board reviewed it, they had some questions and some ideas that they wanted Pepsi to marinate on a little bit more. So it returned back to Pepsi for those considerations. One of them was specifically around the diversity component in the accountability model. There was also some interest in elevating the value of EdTPA and PPA-T tests, as in terms of that was an area that programs felt they had the most impact on, and so could we adjust the weight of that in the model, and also to establish a minimum number of surveys. If surveys were going to be included in the model, that we have a minimum number, because that might negatively impact smaller programs. So those things came out of the board meeting in January, went back to Pepsi. Pepsi did some more work on it. And ultimately in August of 2020, the revised alternative model returned to the board from Pepsi, and that was ultimately approved. And from that point, it was sent to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Commission, Committee, for consideration. Then some time passed, COVID happened, and a lot of other things were drawing our various attention elsewhere. But ultimately, in December of 2022, DPI started to work with OSBM and internal legal counsel to develop a fiscal note. And the fiscal note is sort of step 2 of the process of actualizing policy into administrative rules. And that took an extensive period of time, but ultimately we got to the point where we could bring this to the board for consideration, which is what we did in January. Now, it's important to note that to date, while we did meet the interest of the regulation in law that we bring an alternative model to the JLEOC. To date, the JLEOC has not offered an official response to that alternative model. And so with that in mind, let me go through a couple other things to help get you up to speed with some of these moving parts for folks that might be new to this process. The 3 measures of accountability on the next slide that are required in law are the annual beginning teacher evaluation. And you can think of that as program completers' first-year summative ratings on NESIS, provided those ratings are within 3 years of program completion. Student growth is the second measure, and that is program completers' first year of EVOS ratings, provided that the completer is eligible to receive a rating, and that rating is within 3 years of program completion. And the third is recent graduate survey. And the recent graduate survey is a survey of recent graduates on the quality of their preparation administered in the first year of teaching following program completion. So those are the 3 measures that are required in law for the model that's currently in law. Then on the next slide, you'll see the proposed administrative rules that were brought to the board for consideration. And in there, essentially what we're trying to do with those administrative rules then is to make the policy that was approved a couple years ago in TCED 008 and 013 into actionable law. So we don't have the teeth in place to issue sanctions because they're not in the administrative code. So that's essentially what we're doing with those administrative rules. The other thing it does is it establishes how to calculate each of the 3 measures. It establishes the accountability thresholds for each of the 3 measures. And it outlines a system to impose sanctions when EPP's effectiveness falls below those accountability thresholds that have been established. So again, none of this is new. This is all stuff that was ultimately put in policy. We're just trying to actualize it as we go forward. So on the next slide, we'll start to take a look at a brief outline of the alternative model. And I should mention that included in your resources in the Google Doc is the technical report that we presented to the JLEOC. And in there is every weed, every blade of grass, every single thing that we did in the development of this. So if you want to get into great detail over that process, please refer to that. That is the most technical resource we have to date on this. But again, this next couple slides are going to go over that alternative model. And this model was developed again by you and your colleagues in Pepsi, as well as a wide variety of EPP stakeholder input in its development. And as you can see here, it has 4 domains and it's set up as a weighted accountability model. So essentially, each of those 4 buckets then gets merged into a weighted composite average. The diversity of domain you'll see at the bottom is one that the proposal at the time, which ultimately went to the JLEOC, was to look at that as a pilot, because at the time we didn't have the data to really incorporate it technically into this process yet. But that picture you see on your screen is the entirety of the alternative accountability model. So let's talk a little bit more about that. On slide 6, then you can see that the difference between the model that's currently in law, which is on the left, and you'll see the 3 measures that we talked about earlier. And then you'll see on the right the alternative model measures, and you'll notice that. And it was very intentional by members of Pepsi to propose that all of the existing measures in law be included in the alternative model. So you'll see they are the same, but there are some additional measures involved in that as well. At the bottom, the employer survey, EdTPA, PPAT, and first-year retention. So I think it's really important and useful to see the differences between those and how they sort of actualize when they're used. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see here. Give me 1 second. Okay, on the this slide here, this next slide, you'll see there are distinct differences in how each of these models would be implemented. On the left, you'll see the model in law. There are some challenges. Obviously, there are pros and cons to implementing any model, but there are some distinct concerns that were voiced by the various stakeholders in the review of this model that's in law. The first is that it's not a weighted model, and instead, a sanction can be issued whenever a program falls below the established thresholds for any subgroup of any of those 3 measures. And that's really important to understand because it can disadvantage larger ed prep programs. If I'm a huge program that has 1,000 students, I may have lots of subgroups within that, and each one of them is an opportunity for me to potentially get a sanction. It can also simultaneously disadvantage the smaller programs. And that's insofar as if you only have 1 or 2 subgroups or very small sample sizes in there, those smaller sample sizes can show wider variation, and that can disadvantage the smaller programs as well. And then the third thing, and I think this is important as well, is if you're a huge program or a small program and you do end up getting one of these sanctions, the sanction could end up sanctioning an entire program on an otherwise healthy program. So in other words, if Andrew University had 1,000 students, I might have only 10 Polka Dot students, and my other 990 students could be just fine, but the entire program gets thrown into jeopardy with a sanction if my 10 Polka Dot students are not at the sanctionable, not above the sanctionable threshold. Now, that's not to say that we ignore that particular subgroup. That those, of course, finding areas of weakness in any program is important for program improvement. But this is a challenge that you could potentially be putting huge programs at risk by heading down that path of how this is implemented. The last thing that was brought up by the stakeholders was an insufficient amount of time for a program falling into sanction to have the time to be able to turn things around. In other words, once you are identified as having a sanction, you move from warning to probation and ultimately to revocation. And if you are just immediately identified as having a warning, it may take you 3 years for a cohort to go through an adjusted program before you have any outcome data that you could measure to see if any things have changed. Meanwhile, the clock continues to tick on the sanctions, and you could move from warning to probation and ultimately to revocation before you had sufficient time to actually demonstrate things. And that's hoping that whatever choices that the program makes are the correct choices. So again, those are some challenges that are in the model in law. Now on the right, you'll see the alternative model challenges, and you'll see, again, there's this issue of sanctioning at the weighted composite level. And that weighted composite level, whenever you're mushing things together to create a weighted composite measure, you do have a challenge that you might be masking potential hotspots within that weighted composite measure. One good thing about that alternative model is that it does create one measure for all programs, so it's a little bit more equitable on that footing. And it wouldn't necessarily, one subgroup would not necessarily force an entire program into a sanction, if the rest of it was otherwise healthy. So insofar as that's in place, those are some positives. But this idea of masking smaller technical hotspots, that is a potential problem. And the thinking behind this alternative model was, while that weighted composite is just one overarching number, there is plenty of granular level data that we provide in the online dashboard that you can cut in any variation, any subgroup, public and private and independents, all the different ways that you want to disaggregate data is more than available for all stakeholders to leverage. So the public has access to it, legislators have access to it, stakeholders have access to it. It is a way of getting at smaller granular level data that the weighted composite level might be masking. So with that, once I've presented all of that, the motion from the board, which is where Dr. Bullock, you were heading at the beginning of this little presentation, was that we take these proposed rules back to Pepsi and allow further study of the alternative model brought to the State Board of Education, and that's the one all the way back in August of 2020, to consider recommendations for revisions of that model if they're needed, and to present the findings to the State Board of Education by June of 2025. So just a couple months from now, they're expecting some sort of a formal response from this commission back to the State Board as they're thinking about their next steps on the accountability rulemaking. That was a ton of information, so let me pause there and see if there are any questions.
Are there any questions? So today, thank you, Dr. Seiberg, for that. And if anybody has any questions, just speak up. But today we wanted to make sure, this happened last week, so we wanted to make sure that this got on the agenda very quickly. I would propose we send this to our EPP subcommittee because that's our typical working model here. And also, we would need, we're going to need the DPI staff, Andy Baxter's on this call, I know, and Andrew and Tom, to come up with some anonymous information about the weighting to see how it would impact, if it's skewed, if it's biased in any way, and of all the pieces. I think those are things that we're going to need to happen quickly. The other thing I would say is we're going to also need some feedback from the field, and I think it's important. When is the next EPP call, Andrew?
It's the Friday following each monthly board meeting, so it'll be the first Friday of March.
Okay, so I would suggest that we send out a communication that this is now back to us and it is in subcommittee. Was that announced? This was coming back to Pepsi?
Well, that was the motion that was approved by the board. And I did I did bring that up at the monthly EPP webinar last Friday.
Okay, great. And we may need to follow up with some more information. Of course, we'll need some feedback to make sure that we're, hearing from the field as we've done in the majority of our decisions. So appreciate that.
Sure.
Other comments or suggestions related to this? This doesn't have to be a motion. This is just our logistically, how are we going to handle this? Does anybody have any comments or ideas or questions?
This is Kim. I would just say, I think it's a good idea for it to go to subcommittee, and some time for us to collect feedback. I did meet with my team internally just to kind of get feedback from folks, and we've got commentary, but no specific questions about what's going on or anything like that.
Great, great. All right, so we'll send that over, quote unquote, to our own subcommittee. And Dr. Seiberg, thanks for being very clear in a presentation that has a lot of history and a lot of components. So that was a lot. Okay, so I have a technical piece here. When we voted for policy 001, we had a member that needed to step away. So that caused us to be out of quorum. So we need to go back. So there's two pieces to that. One, we need a motion to revisit the vote for license 001, and we have to go through the motion process. And then we need to re-vote on that license 001 item. Even though we had everyone approved it that voted, we need to make sure we all vote so we're in quorum for that. So could I please, so if you could be patient and hang on with me till we get through this, could I please have a motion to revisit the vote to go back to the agenda item for license 001 and to revisit the vote for that?
So moved, Hank.
Thank
I'll
you,
second
Hank.
Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Any discussion on that? Ms. Edwards, could you call the roll for that motion, please?
Yes. So do I need to call everyone on the roll or just people that are here? I just want to make sure.
Ryan, do you want to weigh in on that?
I don't think it's necessary to call the names of people that we know are not here.
Right.
I would say that I think that you can simply call the vote again. I don't know that you need to necessarily move to reconsider it, because if there was no quorum, then it was an invalid vote to begin with. So I would just say call the motion again on
Okay.
approving that recommendation.
Okay, so
Fine. Thank you. All right, Chair Bullock.
okay, let me just be clear, Ryan. Are we doing the motion that's on the table, or are we just voting again? Because I've got a motion on the table.
I would just ask the person who made the motion to take back that motion and make a new motion to approve the recommendations for LICN 001.
That would be me. Okay, that's good. So I would like to make a motion, revisit the motion to approve the policy amendments to licensure 001. Hank? I need someone to make that motion. I'm making the motion, so I need a second.
I second this, Hank.
Thanks. Any discussion? All right, so we're going to now call the roll for the vote to approve the policy amendments to license 001 to be sent to the State Board of Education in March. So we're voting on the policy amendments. All right. Okay, Ms. Edwards, go.
Chair Bullock.
Approve.
Ms. Edwards, approve. Dr. Fleming.
Approved.
Ms. Hoskins. Ms. Jenkins.
Approved.
Ms. Patton.
Approved.
Mr. Smith.
Approve.
Dr. Weddington.
Approve.
Ms. Weisner.
Approve.
Dr. Winter.
Approve.
And Vice Chair Penfield, or Dr. Penfield, sorry.
Approve.
That's
Okay.
quorum.
Sorry.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. So that motion passes. Thanks for your patience and thank you, Ryan. All right. The other thing I want to announce is that in the State Board of Education meeting last week, they discussed their legislative agenda. And one of the items, if you have not seen that, was our Praxis Court item was part of what they were suggesting as part of their legislative agenda. So that was very exciting to see. So thanks to everybody for their good work on that. Dr. Penfield, shout out to you for chairing that committee during that time. So thanks for that. Okay, so that is everything that we have. So thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for the discussions today. I remind commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held in a hybrid manner on Thursday, March 13th at 3:30 to 6:30, if it takes that long. We have now completed our meeting. Unless there's an additional business at this time, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. This is Randy.
Thank you, Dr. Penfield. Thank you, Kim. Any discussion? All right, Ms. Edwards, you're on for the last time today. Roll call for adjournment.
Chair Bullock. Ms. Edwards, approve. Dr. Fleming,
Approved.
Ms. Jenkins,
Approve.
Ms. Patton,
Approved.
Dr. Penfield,
Approve.
Mr. Smith,
Approve.
Dr. Weddington,
Approve.
Ms. Weisner,
Approve.
and Dr. Winter.
Approve.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.